This is The High Road with author and registered psychotherapist, Dr. Marlene Bizub. Dr. Marlene speaks to the heart of people who need to be lifted up and get out of the muck and mire that often accompanies major life changes, such as divorce or separation. Dr. Marlene will aspire to help parents of divorce to love their children more than they hate their ex, and to learn to take the high road. So please welcome the host of The High Road, Dr. Marlene.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Welcome, George. Thanks for being here once again.
Good morning, Dr. Marlene, at least in our time zone. It's great to be with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you always, but especially today because this is actually out of your area. Usually I like having you when things are in your area, but I want to hear from your perspective about some of the things that we're going to talk about. So I made a presentation with another professional at our local family law bar conference last week, the end of last week. And it was an interesting discussion. And I think everyone in the room, and they were mostly attorneys because it was the bar, I think we all agreed that people don't understand reunification cases, or more specifically, kids who resist. So there can be reunification necessary for a lot of reasons, like parents can just be estranged from their children. Or here in Colorado Springs, where we have military bases, parents can be deployed and come back from deployment. I mean, there can be all kinds of things that happen. They live out of state for a while, things like that, that they need to be reunified with their children. But the particular challenge in that is kids who resist. And there's a lot of kids who resist. And sometimes they resist because the other parent has done their best to turn them against that parent. Sometimes it's for very legitimate reasons that the parent has earned themselves. Like sometimes they've earned the children not trusting them, not, being afraid of them, things like that. Because I have parents who say, "Why are you afraid of me?" And then the kid will, or, "Why don't you trust me?" The kid will rattle off a list of 4 or 5 things. When you punched a hole in the wall and you slammed the door and then you knocked mom down, and it's not always the dad. I don't mean to imply that at all. But sometimes, often kids are mad at mom because mom has tried to alienate them from dad. But kids who resist are by far the hugest challenge, and it is huge in these cases. And my guess is, since you don't work with kids, you don't hear what the kids say except through your client, correct?
Absolutely. We don't get to have direct contact with the children typically. So we don't know if our client is an accurate reporter, if their perception is accurate, if their recollection is accurate. So we have to take that at face value, but always reserve a little bit of skepticism about what's going on.
hmm hmm Which is wise. And that's just it. I was telling the group the other day, and you're probably going to hear me say that a dozen times today, but I was telling the group the other day, there are at least 3, sometimes more, versions of what happened. There's mom's version, there's dad's version, there's the kid's version. And if there's more than one child, there's 2 or 3 kids' versions of what happened. And so to say, that this is what happened, and I called out the attorneys, you'd be proud of me actually, because I think you would support me in this, for simply believing what their client tells them. Would you agree that that is one of the biggest mistakes that an attorney can make and is very short-sighted on the part of the attorney to simply believe everything your client tells you?
Sure, because it is short-sighted because we don't know whether or not our client is an accurate reporter. We don't know about their selective perception, selective retention about what happened. So we do maintain a little bit of intellectual distance, if you will,
Mhm.
uh, and reserve the thought that perhaps our client is either exaggerating, misunderstanding, misreporting. So we have to keep that in reserve, and yet we try to take our client at face value, of course.
Yes, yes. And, I'm glad to hear you say that, and I knew you would support me, in my thought that, you can't take everything they say, as gospel. But there are some attorneys who and, I mean, you tell me this is why I was really anxious to talk with you about some of this after the conference. Um, some attorneys and it might be a tactic. I mean, it probably is. When they approach me as though their client's fact pattern I mean, yes, I'm sorry, their client's fact pattern is indeed fact, that it is true. And it might not be, in other words, when the client says, this happened in this session, and then the attorney contacts me. Well, I heard in the session last night such and such happened. And I write back or talk to them on the phone or whatever and say, you weren't there. You don't know. And so don't talk as though that is what happened. You can say, my client said that happened. But
Right.
I often get this because of what happened in the session last night when, so and so did such and such. And I'm like, you weren't there. Stop and think about where you got that and whether or not it might be accurate or it might not. And you made a good point. I want to address this before I turn this back over to you. You mentioned perception. And I've had this conversation with several parents over just the last week alone that perception is reality. And your perception might be I've got a dad and a kid, and we'll come back to this one because I want to discuss this case. But I've got a dad and a kid arguing over whether or not the boy pushed the cat off the back of the couch or hit the cat off the back of the couch. Who cares? But, dad said, well, that's not the truth. Okay, there's different truths here. There's your truth, your perception, his truth, his perception, but your perception is your reality. And what you remember is your reality. And short of videotaping every moment of life, which we can't do, although there's a lot of things recorded these days, I'll tell you. But short of that, I don't know how we ever get to the truth.
Well, that's a good question. And if anybody watches television, they're going to see attorney ads for probably personal injury attorneys. And in those ads, a lot of times they will hear the attorney claim to fight for them. And so it is a little bit, it takes some finesse and some sensitivity to start educating the client that fighting, we can do that at any time in a family law case. It takes no imagination to fight. We can do that, but so we have to start educating the client early on in the initial conference or consultation that the alternatives to fighting often end up in a much better result, in a much more peaceful result, and a much more healthful result for the children especially. So people need to understand that we're conditioned, if you will, to fight. And so we have to re-educate ourselves and strike a balance between our capabilities of going to court and representing a client competently in court and trying to steer them in a different direction without having them feel like, well, you won't fight for me, you don't care about my case. So it takes
Yes.
some finesse, it takes, I think, some skill to start educating the client that there are better alternatives to simply fighting about their case. And that typically
Mhm.
their children are going to be healthier, happier, more secure if there's a more peaceful resolution to the case.
Yes, and I am so glad that you brought up because I totally agree with you. There is an art to finding that balance between, and I can't imagine how hard it is, between supporting your client and challenging your client at the same time. Like you sometimes have to challenge when they come back and tell you a story. Okay, I know that's your perception. Do you think that's the way the child saw it? Do you think that's the way Dr. Marlene saw it? Something like that, rather than, like I said, just calling me and it's fact. But I get that that's your job and you have to support your client. And if they feel like you aren't supporting them, they're going to go find a new attorney. And you don't want that either. But, I mean, it's just all really, really a challenge, and, like I told the group the other day, it's I respect you guys the more I know about what you do, because my job's the easy job. I mean, I just tell them like it is, and they like it or don't like it and follow it or don't follow it, but you have to maintain rapport in order to represent that person, and so getting them to come off of that fighting mode. I had somebody text me the other day, another therapist, another psychologist, and I wish I could pull it up quickly, and I don't know that I can. But she said, "I attorney is. Can you let me know?" And I thought, You don't want a bulldog. That's not what you want. You want somebody who can work, like you said, with finesse with that parent to best represent them in court. Because don't you think when you are that bulldog and you just do everything your fighting client wants, you're not going to come across well in court?
Well, not only that, but the judge certainly has a certain amount of professional skepticism.
Yeah.
And so if the attorney presents himself or herself as if their client is absolutely correct and absolutely truthful and absolutely accurate, the judge is probably not going to respect that perspective too much. And I respectfully disagree with you that your job is easier. I don't think that's necessarily.
As far as working with clients, well, no, you're right. That probably isn't an accurate statement, because clients get mad at me too and don't want to work with me either. Um, it's just you have to maintain that balance to keep the client because they can move on to another attorney, and often I am court appointed, so they're stuck with me. So I guess from that perspective, it's easier, but that doesn't mean that the relationship or them working with me, makes it any less stressful or any easier. Um, yeah, I mean, parents just don't get that, and therefore the attorneys, like you said, have to educate yourselves and then have to educate your clients to understand that that's not what's going to go well in court. That's what the judge doesn't want to see. Also, I was at another conference online actually Monday and Tuesday. The Association of Family and Conciliation Courts had their national conference online earlier this week. And one of the judges in one of the sessions said, "We get to know the attorneys on our cases, and we know who to be skeptical." You mentioned skepticism earlier. And this judge said that we know who to be skeptical about and who to listen to and know that what they're telling me is probably 100% or close accurate. And so I thought that was very interesting too. And when people go looking for a bulldog attorney and somebody recommends someone, don't you think the court knows that that attorney is a fighter? and that they're there to resolve it. And the court is looking for us to resolve the case.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I've always felt like it took years to establish a reputation, and a reputation can be lost in seconds. So I've always been very careful about how I presented myself in court, uh, with due respect for the judge and the process. But it is sometimes not possible to get the client out of that I'm going to fight mode. And of course, we're bound by the client's definition of what they want out of the representation. We're legally obligated to seek that. So it takes a certain amount of finesse to move the client off of that fighting mode. And I guess if it were physical, we'd say fight or flight mode. But
Mhm.
they're really, I'm sure that uh, their body is responding with stress and so forth, the fear and the anxiety that they have in going to court. But there has to be a balance between being willing to fight for the client and being willing to educate the client.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That is so true. And it's just a piece that many divorcing parents miss. They just believe they're in for the fight, and you are. I mean, you've said this many times, George. It's an adversarial system. It really is. But if you can educate the client to not take that approach and to work things out, and you're going to get a better result when the parents buy into whatever agreement they come up with than to have someone dictate it to them. People don't like a dictated result. So however you go about working it out is always better if you work it out yourself.
Yeah, I think if people want to maintain more control over their lives, more control over the outcome, more control over the structure of their parenting plan or their co-parenting agreement, then they don't do that through the court.
Right. Right. Yep. Wrong place to seek. Well, what is it you said that nobody's ever litigated their way to a good
A healthy
co-parenting relationship?
co-parenting, yeah, a healthy co-parenting relationship. And that's true. I stand by that. They don't litigate their way to a healthy co-parenting relationship. They start collaborating, as difficult as that may sound under the circumstances when people are very angry uh, and scared. But working on collaborating and learning how to collaborate with their parenting is critical, I think, to a good, healthy co-parenting relationship.
Yes. And to that point, in the level 2 co-parenting class that we have here that I teach, and I did not develop the class. I'm not going to take credit for that, but I'm one of the providers of the class. And we do a conflict resolution assessment, and it gives parents a score in each of 5 areas. Like, you don't have a certain style of conflict resolution. You have a score in each of 5 different areas, and they are accommodating. You know what? I'm gonna start the next section of this show, next part of the show with this, because it's going to take longer than we have. We're going to need to take a break here shortly. And so I'm going to hold off on that. But suffice it to say, when we come back, we'll talk about the areas of conflict resolution and what the areas are and how parents get scores in each of those areas and how they can look at that and figure out how they can work together better.
I
Sound
think
good?
that that's critical. And if they work together, they're not pulling in opposite directions, at least as to their children.
That's right. So we'll address that when we come back. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to easysense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's easysense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Before we went to break, we were talking about a conflict resolution. And now I have enough time. I knew I didn't have enough time to get into the 5 areas. But well, first of all, let me preface this by saying, when we tell our clients, you need to work together better, you need to collaborate, you need to compromise, we don't tell them how to do those things. And you'll get one parent who says, well, I give and they never give back. Or, well, you got to look a little deeper into the process. And I get it. Shame on us for just saying, you've got to work together better. We've got to give them the tools, you know. So, like I said, in the level 2 co-parenting class that was developed years ago by a committee here in our judicial jurisdiction, there's a conflict resolution assessment, and parents get a score in each of the 5 areas of accommodating, avoiding, competing, compromising, and collaborating. And I'll say them again: accommodating, avoiding, competing, compromising, and collaborating. And if you see that one parent has a high score in competing and another has a high score in accommodating, or let's say, here's a better one, avoiding. They have a high score in avoiding, and the other has a high score in competing. Let me just give you a vision. This is the couple who in the home, one is trying to walk away from the other parent, going from room to room in the house, trying to get away. And the other is following them everywhere they go, trying to engage them. Because one wants to resolve it and discuss it. And, I hate to say have a little competition, but that's basically what it is. Let's discuss it. Let's debate. Let's fight it out. And the other is just avoiding at all costs. And so they're trying to not talk to you. You're insisting on talking to them. Hence, we have horrible arguments usually, and the couple ends in divorce. But if you have that knowledge and awareness that this one tends to collaborate, this one compromises, but they don't collaborate so well, And we do get into, we don't have time for it here, of course, but we do get into what does that mean to collaborate? What does that look like? What does compromise look like? Because those two things alone are different. They sound similar and they are similar, but they are different. And so when you know the other person is avoiding, or the other one is competing or accommodating or whatever they're doing, it's easier to figure out how to work with that person because you now know I'm going to be the one to leave and go from room to room in the house. And I'm going to be the one to follow you and insist that we talk. It just helps to know that. And then they can agree on some things, such as they agree that when one asks for a 5-minute break, they get a 5-minute break, or 10 or 15, but they get a break, and they just have to have some ground rules for fighting, as silly as that sounds. It is absolutely the truth.
Well, oftentimes I say nobody gives a standing ovation to a compromise, and
Right.
let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And
Yes.
so people need to learn that. That's not something
Yes.
that they naturally tend to gravitate toward. Those are learned realities for them.
They are. They totally are. And people either don't learn things or they learn bad habits. And it's usually from watching the people around them when they're growing up. And it might be parents, it might be other caregivers, it might be people at school, but adults at school, especially. The kids watch the people around them and especially the adults around them. And that's how they learn to be how they are when it comes to things like fighting and conflict resolution and cooperating with each other and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I try to stay in my own lane here, and really I don't get to work with the kids that much at all. Really, I don't get to see the kids or work with the kids, but or if I do, it's through the parent that I represent, and I have to be very careful there about stepping on toes and getting out of my lane.
Right, right. Yes. So let's go back to the role you do play, because this is really crucially important in resistive kids. Those kids who don't want to go and resist, again, you don't talk to them. All you know is what your client tells you or what the other professionals on the case tell you, either the other attorney or a neutral like me, but that's what you have to go on. But once it is brought to your attention that, the child's reasons for feeling this way are pretty legitimate, then doesn't it become your role to talk to your client about that hard stuff and say, and I'm going to give you a perfect example here in a minute, or maybe you want to hear it first. But isn't that kind of your job to say to the client, okay, you've got some things that you need to work on, per the therapist. She or he has told me this. And, do you see that as part of your role?
It's a very delicate balance
Yeah.
to maintain the client's trust and confidence, and also encourage the client to change or improve his or her behavior.
Yeah.
It has to be done very carefully, but
Mhm.
certainly I think it is part of our role. There's no question about it. And ultimately, the client, I think, has a better outcome once they're educated to the alternatives to just fighting and uh, raising Cain with each other. There's so much better, peaceful, healthful ways to go forward. And so we have to educate them to that without accusing them.
Right. Right. You can't you can't lose them in the process, because that doesn't benefit anyone either. So I'm going to share my story. I said I would, and I will. But this attorney happened to be present the other day when I was making the presentation. And I called on him or referenced him and referenced the case several times during our presentation. And what it boils down to is this child is resistive. There's two, but one's almost 18. So you know that routine that once they get to be close to 18, they're going to be able to do what they want anyway. So we don't try to force them. The other is 11. And not only are we going to require him to participate, we will force him, because kids say, "Are you going to force me?" And I'll say, "Yeah, we are." But anyway, we also do that gently. I don't mean to make it sound insensitive or uncaring. And there's an art to working with resistive kids, but it takes the whole group of professionals. It can't just be me doing my job, you doing your job, because we might be working against each other. But what happened is this 11-year-old had very valid reasons for feeling the way he feels about his dad. Now, luckily, thankfully, in this process of reunification therapy, we are working through those things. But it took the attorney, after I told him that in my office, dad's behavior played out right in front of my eyes. His arms are flailing and he's yelling at me and he's posturing and standing over me and pointing. And I said, no wonder these kids feel the way they feel. Well, one of the things the attorney and I said the other day that I then shared with the group, we said it before I went up to present, but then I shared it, that he said he's had many talks with this dad since I told him about that incident. And I said, I believe you have, because he is behaving completely differently. I can't even take credit for that. I'm the therapist. I would like to be able to say that was my work and my doings in the sessions. But no, that came from dad's attorney working with him. But you have to have trust before you can approach your client with that kind of stuff, don't you? You've got to have rapport with the client.
You really do. And
Yeah.
again, I think that starts in the initial conference or consultation.
Mhm.
Uh, you set the tone for that relationship. And I think we can explain to the client, hey, sometimes there are things that I'm going to tell you that you may not agree with, but I have seen this more than once, and I'm telling you things that will accrue to your benefit. And that's
Mhm.
why I'm telling you these things. And so if you establish that rapport and that trust initially, I think it's easier, but there's certainly an educational process that goes on between attorney and client.
Yes, yes. And not only do I know that that attorney has had the talks with his client that he says he has had. He also has suggested some additional services for him to what the court ordered. So the court ordered both parents to go to counseling and, things like that, but outside of our reunification therapy. But he also suggested that this guy get into a dad's support group, divorced dad's support group. He has done that. That has helped. He has taken a class, and I'm not sure exactly what the class was. I think it was anger management, actually. I think it was something having to do with expression of anger or some type of anger management class. But he just presents completely differently. Now, we've been at this a year, and that's another thing I want to say that I shared with the group the other day. We both shared, my co presenter and I shared with the group, is this is not a quick and easy fix. Now, does it need to take a year? No. But are you going to come in for 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe 5 sessions and have it fixed? No. None of us are that good as therapists to fix lifelong behaviors of a parent and lifelong relationship issues between parent and child, because it often takes parent or child, but usually parent, looking at themselves and changing or modifying, adjusting, whatever you want to call it, their behavior. And if we have the support of the other professionals, that's huge.
And as I say, my best friend on a case is a good mental health professional, because I think in many contexts, you're better at educating the client than we are, because they accept from you things that they don't accept from us or see as our betrayal of that trust. So
Right,
I envy your ability to do that without being concerned about, or at least the concern that I have about losing the client's trust.
right,
Uh, we don't want to hear a client say, "Well, you're unwilling to fight for me." No, I'm very willing to fight for you. I'm
right.
probably going to charge you more. It's going to cost more, but I'm very willing to do it if that's what the road you want to go down. However, if you want a higher quality of life for yourself and your child or children, then we need to look at some alternatives.
Yes, yes. And I so appreciate the attorney who is not afraid to say, let's look at what else you might be able to do.
Mhm.
Therapy, classes, groups, whatever. I mean, it might be reading a certain book, you know, but
Or even getting a PCDM on the case, a parent coordinator decision maker on the case. I think a
yes,
lot of times that eliminates a lot of the squabbles that oftentimes get worse over time or without some sort of attention. And so that is a fairly easy remedy,
hmm,
and I think it covers a lot of ground and can head off a lot of potential problems for the couple.
yes, I totally agree. I agree because that's the role that I fill most for the court. But I do agree, and my old adage, and I stand by this, I will always stand by this. I can tell a parent the same thing that the other parent or someone else tells them, and they'll receive it completely differently because it's coming from me. And
Absolutely.
sometimes, same with the attorney. Sometimes I do, and this will be a nice segue into the last thing we're going to talk about today. But I often need the help of the other professionals, specifically the attorney, to say, here's what's going on with this parent. Help reinforce. Like, you don't have to be the one to say the hard stuff, but help reinforce what I'm telling them. And here's what I'm telling them. And again, this attorney that I was talking about has done exactly that. He's listened to what I've said the guy's problems are, and then I go back to there is an art to this, and you have to be careful. But he has gently woven into his conversations with the client the issues that I have brought to his attention that the client needs to work on.
Yeah, I think when you have that, if I don't want to overuse this word, but when you have that collaboration between the mental health side of the case and the legal side of the case, things tend to go better.
Well, they do. They do. And what we're going to talk about, and I think I'm going to save most of it for our last segment here, but you have some parents who will actually pit professionals against each other or really work to get certain professionals on their side. Now, we expect that the attorney is going to be on their side. By gosh, you better be because you represent them. But in other cases, well, I'll just use this same case that I've been talking about. We now have a child's legal representative, which is an attorney, but a neutral, and we have a visitation supervisor. And, like I said, I'm going to save this for the last segment, and we're getting close. So let's just hold off and go to break here. And then we can have the whole last segment to talk about this. Does that sound good?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, time management here. All right, this is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll be right back.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like it was almost instant, like I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. Yeah, it feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Before we went to break, we were talking about the professionals working together in these cases. And I think, George, this is crucially important, and it's something that we often miss in family law or domestic relations cases. And it really is pulled from or stems from the model that we use in dependency and neglect cases, where the Department of Human Services is involved and stuff like that. They frequently have what they call staffings with all the different professionals. Well, in this case that I'm talking about, we have all of those different professionals because I'm doing reunification therapy. As I said before we went to break, the court appointed a CLR, child's legal representative, and we have a visitation supervisor because aside from the therapy sessions, the court is trying to promote time spent between dad and kids just having fun and getting reacquainted. Because as I mentioned earlier, we're a year into this case. And so the court saw fit, and rightfully so, to have some supervised visits occur where they do things both in an office setting and they go out into the community. And I think it's important to talk about these details because this is the overlooked stuff, because a lot of people who just work in the court system, like attorneys, don't know all this or think about all of this. Same with judges, you know. But what they do is they went 1 week to Top Golf. They went the next week to Dave and Buster's. And I think everyone knows what those things are, but Dave and Buster's is an arcade type place. And we all know, I think, what Top Golf is, or those type of golf places. And so it gets them out of the office and in a more natural setting, if you will. Well, what happened at the beginning of these other professionals coming on board is you get one parent or the other, and it did happen here, where they try to get that new to the case professional on their side, if you will. And so then it creates some um, mild conflict. I wouldn't call it conflict, but a little dissension between where this professional is at and where that professional is at. Now, we all know, as I've said before, or, I mentioned earlier, attorneys have their role. They clearly have their role. You have to represent your client. But this concept of all of the professionals working together, having staffings, and at the last status conference we had on this particular case, we actually asked the court to bless us having professional meetings or staffings. And George, as you know, for those out there who don't, but I know you do, this is not common in these kinds of cases. And that's my point is I think we've got to look at this model as a way to move this family forward and not rip professionals apart, because parents they will rip professionals apart. They will triangulate between professionals and get this one on their side and that one on the other side. And now we've just increased or enhanced the war, if you will.
Well, the way I see that is when a client presents as victim. And that's very difficult to deal with because they see themselves as aggrieved. They see themselves as a victim of the behaviors
Yep.
of the other party or parent. And then they try to be manipulative with all the professionals by posturing themselves as victim all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's tough to get somebody out of that mode. I don't think we do a very good job of it. We try, but when the client is intent on posturing themselves as victim
Mm-hmm.
throughout the process, we desperately need the help of the mental health professionals to move that person off of that self-perception or identity as victim.
Right, right, because they both will come in as being victim. And just like in this case, she's the victim to his anger, and he's the victim to her alienation. And so they both come in, well, he's got an anger problem, and I'm not going to be a victim to that anymore. And he comes in, well, she's alienating, and I'm not going to be a victim to that anymore. And you know what? A little bit of both of those are true. Has she alienated or been overprotective? You can call it what you want, but we all know what it looks like. Yeah, she has. Has he had an anger problem and shown some inappropriate anger expression? Yeah, he has. But that's what we're here for. And you get some professionals, and it's not just the attorneys, it's the other professionals too, who become locked into the other parent's problem, the other parent's shortcoming. It's like, yeah, but she's an alienator, period. And they don't look at their client's issue. Or he's got an anger problem, period. And they don't look at what their client is doing. So everybody has to look realistically at both parents and stop finger pointing and blame placing and all of that.
I think that's true, and it requires some self-examination on the part of the clients, and they're not always
And
in a
they're
place
professionals.
where they can do that.
Right. Right. No, that's true. That's true. And I think the professionals, and I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but the professionals as well have to do some self examination, because if we are only in litigation mode and we're just going to be the best advocate we can be for our client, which is great, but we're not going to probably move off of that position of the other parent being the problem. And so we all have to come together and everybody acknowledge a little bit of what your contribution to the problem is. And the same with the other professionals who buy into parents and say, oh, I'm going to, take up for this parent because I feel like they really are the victim here. We can't let anyone be the victim. We all have to move past victimhood.
I think that's true, very true, and it's sometimes very difficult for the client who wants sympathy for their position. And we have to be very careful and skillful about
Mhm.
saying, you can't change the other party, but you can change your behavior. And
Exactly.
you can work with both the other parent, and you can work with the professionals in the case to try to reach a functional um, arrangement that is at least healthy for the child or the children involved in the case. And if we can keep their focus on that, then we can go a lot further, I think, in encouraging them for self-examination and to see what about their behaviors they can control and change.
George, I love what you said about, well, everything you just said, but what you said is something I say to the parents I work with all the time. You cannot change the other parent's behavior. We can try, we can address it, and we can work on it, but you can't ultimately change it. They have to want to change. The only thing you can change, and you said it yourself, is your own reaction to them. And
Mhm.
when parents get that, that is powerful because they stop trying to change the other parent and they start working on changing their own reaction to that parent.
And that has to be almost a breakthrough when that happens in a case.
Yes, it truly is. It truly is. And it will change the whole course and nature of the case when that happens. It truly will.
Well, and that dynamic is important. And I think trust is a critical factor for clients going through divorce or separation. Um, they need to have trust in the mental health professional on the case. They need to have trust in their own attorney. And it's easier to work with a client who really acknowledges that you're acting in their best interests and you're trying to educate them as to alternatives to simply fighting all the time.
Yes. Yes. There definitely is an art to getting clients to see that, for the parents to see that there is an alternative. Is it a litigious system, an adversarial system? Yes. But is there an alternative? Absolutely. And we have mediators, we have collaborative law professionals. Last week, I attended a collaborative law meeting. I mean, there's alternatives out there, but parents come in expecting to fight. And I think we, as the professionals in the family court system, have to change that perspective and that perception that that's what we're here to do.
Well, and I think sometimes that's difficult when you have attorneys on advertising saying, I'm going to fight for you. Fight, fight, fight
Right.
is the word, the operative word. And we need to move off of that somehow.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think that wraps it up. That's a mic drop anyway, right there. But thank you, George, for being here and helping, delve into all of this and analyze it. And it looks like we have found a good solution as we have to all work together and not just fight.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you, Dr. Marlene, and I always learn a lot from being with you.
Oh, thank you, George. Well, we will be back next week, but this is Dr. Marlene and George, and you've been watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll see you next week. Oh, not next week. It's Thanksgiving next week, but the week after. See you then.
Tune in to The High Road with host Dr. Marlene and gain insight into how to rise above tough circumstances and learn the skills that will help you take the high road in your life, no matter what challenges might come your way, on the next episode of The High Road.